Hi, I'm Jim Meyer. I'm a retired pastor in the ELCA Lutheran Church, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. In my collection in Times Long Ago, I'd like to share the story entitled Store Bought by James P. Meyer. In times long ago, people went to the general store to buy a wide variety of goods. These were often called store-bought goods. When you came into the store, there were several departments to choose from. There was a grocery area, small tools and implements, shoes, yarn, and yardage, and many other items to choose from, all mostly displayed in one room or with an adjoining room. The grocery department was usually the busiest. In this area, there was an array of dry goods stacked in piles of 50 to 100-pound sacks, containing flour, rice, sugar, salt, and any other goods which were sold in bulk. There were also barrels filled with grocery items of all sorts. Why, there were the pickle barrels, the apple barrel, the coffee barrel, the cracker barrel, maybe the candy barrel, and many other barrels. Of all these items, they had to be counted out and measured, one by one or scoop by scoop, to each customer when an order was placed. The smells and sights were a child's delight. There was the aroma of the bananas that hung in the front window, the coffee and the manure packs. The colors of the yardage and assorted candies were enticing. Children were always given candy free. It was a special treat to get to the store and get store-bought candy because it always seemed to taste better. On the counter was a cigar cutter. Further on down, the coffee grinder, and next to it, the decanter of costly assorted candy. One afternoon, as the proprietor was tending to his duties and waiting on his customers, young Georgie came running up to him. "Hey, mister, I want some jelly beans," he cried excitedly as he tugged the proprietor's apron to get his attention. The proprietor, Mr. Johnson, looked down at Georgie as though sizing him up and replied, "Okay, here you are," as he reached for the decanter of assorted candies on the counter. "No!" cried Georgie. "I want only black ones." Mr. Johnson looked hard at Georgie as though trying to see right through him, and then he turned his head and looked to the very top shelf for the decanter of black jelly beans. Shaking his head, Mr. Johnson grabbed hold of the rolling ladder and pulled it to just the right place where he could climb up and reach the black jelly beans. Climbing the ladder proved a little difficult for Mr. Johnson. He had a young helper who usually did this sort of thing, but was gone at the moment. As he climbed, Mr. Johnson's left foot slipped on one of the rungs and he bumped his chin on the upper rung. Still trying to keep his wits about him, he looked down at the waiting youngster, who smiled broadly at him and with a grimace turned back to his task of climbing the ladder to the very top. Reaching, he pulled the decanter of black jelly beans to his chest and with one hand carefully maneuvered down the ladder to the ground. He had just a trace of perspiration on his brow, and his cheeks were rosy and a little flushed, and his breath was a little labored. "Here you are. How many do you want?" "1 dozen," Georgie replied innocently. Stepping back, a bit surprised and containing himself, Mr. Johnson, taking the scoop, dug in and counted out the beans. 9, 10, 11, 12. Oops! Mr. Johnson, perhaps out of spite for his troubles, took back the 13th bean that accidentally fell into Georgie's outstretched hand. Screwing the cover back on the decanter, Mr. Johnson prepared to climb the ladder once again. This time he was more careful. Only once did he have a mishap. The ladder slid a bit when he was halfway to the top. Sweating and holding the decanter as tightly as he could to his chest, he finally made it to the top shelf. Straining to stay on the ladder, he stretched his arm to deposit the decanter on the top shelf and then climbed down rather rapidly. On the ground, Mr. Johnson spun around to give the price. "That'll be, and my sister wants 2 dozen." The end. And now our family room reflection. People were bringing little children to him in order that he might touch them, and the disciples spoke sternly to them. But when Jesus saw this, he was indignant and said to them, "Let the little children come to me. Do not stop them, for it is to such as these that the kingdom of God belongs to. Truly I tell you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God as a little child will never enter in." And he took them up in his arms and laid his hands on them and blessed them. From the Gospel of St. Mark, chapter 10, verses 13 through 16. And now our recollections. The innocent self-centeredness gives children the opportunity to excel and express themselves in want and need. Such is what we want for all children who are dependent upon adults to provide for them. This is exactly what God would have us all do, to come to him with our needs, our wants and desires, so that he can be generous with us. Children still tend to have an open hand outstretched for the jelly beans. Quite often, adults have a closed hand with thoughts of doing it myself. Where are you in these stories? Like getting into the lap of Santa, have you crawled into the lap of Jesus recently so he could lay his hands on you and bless you with his loving heart? You only have to open your hand to him to receive such blessing. Where are you in these stories?